We have a guest speaker this evening. I wonder if he needs this light. Are you using notes? Well, you're going to need a light on the podium? No, I'm guessing that's a no. He doesn't talk a lot. He's saving it all for coming up here. So let me tell you about him. And I'm going to read this because I'd like to tell you I memorized it, but no. So, the Reverend Gregory J. Boyle is the founder and executive director of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. Yeah. But wait, there's more. A native Angelino, Father Boyle entered the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, in 1972 and was ordained a Catholic priest in 1984. He holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy and English from Gonzaga University, a master's degree in English from Loyola Marymount University, Master of Divinity degree from the Weston School of Theology, and Master of Sacred Theology degree from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, and soon he'll have his personal development program in SCE complete. You know, he's done all that, but has he ever filled out a field licensing application? Damn well know he's really doing something. So, by 1988, having buried an ever-growing number of young people killed in gang violence, Father Boyle and parish and community members sought to address the escalating problems and unmet needs of gang-involved youth by developing positive opportunities for them, including establishing an alternative school and daycare program and seeking out legitimate employment. They called this initial effort Jobs for a Future. Gang violence is about a lethal absence of hope, Father Boyle has said. Nobody has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. In the wake of the 1992 Los Angeles riots, Jobs for a Future and Proyecto Pastoral, a community organizing project, began at Dolores Mission. And they launched their first social enterprise business in an abandoned bakery that Hollywood producer Ray Stark helped them purchase. They called it Homeboy Bakery. In the ensuing years, after his return to Jobs for a Future in 1993, the success of Homeboy Bakery created the groundwork for additional social enterprise businesses, leading Jobs for a Future in 2001 to become an independent, nonprofit organization, Homeboy Industries. Today, Homeboy Industries employs and trains former gang members in a range of social enterprises, as well as provides critical services to 15,000 men and women who walk through the doors every year seeking a better life. Won't you please welcome Father Gregory J. Boyle. Hello, sir.
I'll give you that microphone. Thank you very much. Boy, there's 9 microphones here, so this is, I have no idea why that is. Anyway, it's a privilege to be with you. Oh my God.
Simplify your life.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I had no idea I was bald. So if you see me this way, you've hardly even noticed it. Which is all I see in the mirror, but now this is, thank you for pointing that out to me. Anyway, it's a privilege to be with you, and we had a good kind of group of people at the workshop earlier, and really honored to be in your presence. And it's the privilege of my life for 30 years. I've worked with gang members, and they've taught me everything of value. The day won't ever come when I have more courage, or I am closer to God, or am more noble than the thousands of men and women I've been privileged to know. As somebody like Lewis, who was did a lot of things at Homeboy, but he was kind of our go-to guy. We would send him to speak at high schools, and he was quite compelling and quite good at it, and in demand even, you know. And we went out to dinner, and he was giving me tips on how to speak publicly. And he said, you know, you gotta pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. And I said, yeah, no shit. That's some good advice there. So brace yourselves. You know, we're all called to do a certain thing, and I think our faiths, as we connect with each other in unity and kinship, is to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. And so, but, you know, we're called to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And to that end, we seek to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And so we go out to the margins, because that's the only way the margins get erased, by all of us going out to them. And you look under your feet, and if you stand there with people, with those on the margins, then the margins get erased, not by some magic that you perform, but it's what happens when we stand against forgetting that we belong to each other. And so you stand with a particularity. You stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless, and you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while you get this extraordinary privilege to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No kinship, no equality. No matter how singularly we may be focused on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so you go out to the margins and you brace yourselves, because people will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And you go out there, and there's a privileged moment where other voices start to get heard. So the homies have taught me everything of value, and I'm so grateful to them. But in the last few years, they've taught me how to text, and I'm really grateful to them, because I've been texting like a madman on the road a lot. So. And I'm pretty good at it, you know, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So I'm sure I'm not alone in being vexed by this stupid autocorrect thing, you know. Right now, a homie just right now sent me a text. This is your prodigal SOB. I say, well, do you mean son? They go, yeah, it's this, anyway. Once a homegirl named Bertha, she was really on a kind of a tough cookie. On a Sunday, she goes, where are you at? I said, well, I'm about to say mass give a talk, rather, to a room full of monjas, and monjas in Spanish is the Spanish word for nuns. I'm about to give a talk to a room full of monjas. So I pushed send, and autocorrect told her that I was about to speak to a room full of ninjas. which, you know, she thought was pretty interesting. You know, I've been here for, you know, a day and a half, and homies have been blowing up my phone, trying to, you know, they're going to cut off my lights, and I just need so much for my rent, and that's a constant, you know, and a homie needed just $100 or something for his rent. I didn't have it. So I texted him, "Things are tight," and I pushed send, and autocorrect told him, "Thongs are tight." And he wrote, "Sorry to hear that." You know, what about my rent? So there I am in a car with two older vatos homies who work at Homeboy, Manuel and Poncho, and they're big guys, tattooed, been to prison. They're about to help me give a talk at a high school in Palm Desert, some couple hours from LA. So they get in the car, Manuel's in the front seat. And we're 15 minutes on the road when Manuel gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself and he chuckles. And I said, "What is it?" He goes, "Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office." Well, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day was beginning at Homeboy. Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our homies, gang members. And it's a tough job. I would not want this job, because this may come as a surprise to you, but gang members can occasionally be attitudinal. So I said, "Well, what's he say?" "Oh, gosh, hang on a second, it's dumb. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy." Well, I almost drove into oncoming traffic, and we laughed so damn hard. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're rivals. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. And that's the goal. There's only one thing, I think, that quenches God's thirst, and that's our own unity with each other, our own kinship, our own connection. That's it. Not interested in anything else, actually. I think it's important to kind of drill down and find the God of our memory, and otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Why is kinship so important? How is this, in fact, God's dream come true? We need a better God than the one we have, you know? And that's the truth. I'm a Jesuit, so St. Ignatius of Loyola used to always talk about the God who's always greater. And that's just a way of saying, once you think you've landed on who God is, whoa, even more spacious, even more expansive, even more oceanic. Don't settle for a partial God. Don't settle for any God than the one we actually have. And I think that's important. We're always on the lookout for the more spacious sense of who God is. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to go to the margins. The homies are kind of famous for mangling the English language in a way that's really quite charming and always illuminating, I find, you know. Once I had a homegirl, Lisa, who worked a trainee at Homeboy, and she wanted to introduce her man to me. So she brings him in, she goes, "This is my sufficient other." I said, no doubt. You know, for many, many years, I was kind of ran the whole show at Homeboy, and so now we have a CEO, and it's a $19 million annual operation, so I'm happy not to have to worry about cash flow and things. So, and I had a homie come into my office, and he says, "Damn, G, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." And I said, "Why?" "Well, you know, she's beginning her administration period." I said, well, I'm just finishing mine, so kind of know what she's going through. But my favorite one, so I say Mass in about 20 different detention facilities, juvenile halls, and probation camps and such. And so I was at San Fernando Juvenile Hall saying Mass on a Sunday morning in a big gym, 300 kids, mainly gang members. And I'm all vested, and I'm sitting on the chair, and I think, well, I'm going to just listen to the word proclaimed by the homies when they come up, and rather than follow along in that little sheet they have that, has the readings in English and in Spanish. So I just rest the sheet on my lap, and I'm listening, and a kid gets up, I think it's Psalm 138 or something, and he proclaims with what I think is an overabundance of confidence, and he gets up and he says, "The Lord is exhausted." And I say, what the hell? And it was, "The Lord is exalted." And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's way better. If you think about it, the exalted God is the one created in our own image, because if I were God, I would want to be exalted. I mean, this seems sort of obvious to me. It's a total projection of who I would want, what I would want to have happen if I were God. But an exhausted God is spacious and expansive, and it's like when you say, "How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm exhausted," but it's a good tired. I go, why is it a good tired? "Oh, I had the grandkids the whole weekend," or I was, giving a talk and a cell phone went off. It's a good tired. Or I helped a friend move into an apartment. It's a good tired, because it's an extensive thing. It's I'm going beyond myself to the other, and so God is sort of pointing the way. I think we need a better God than the one we have. We don't want to settle for a partial God. Otherwise, it won't make any sense going to the margins. A thing that's helpful for me is the fact that in the original covenant, God says, "If you love me," now the God I would create in my own image would say, "Love me back." But that's not what this spacious, exhausted God says. It says, "If you love me, have a special, preferential love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger." And God isolates these through three subgroupings of the poor, because God thinks that these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered in this particular way, God thinks they are trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to the kinship of God. So we're not being called to the margins to rescue those on the margins. But go figure, if we all go to the margins, everyone will find rescue. Saving lives is for the Coast Guard. We should stop trying to do it. I had a earnest gang member who was working in the streets in Houston and said, "How do you reach them?" Meaning gang members. And I said, "For starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Because you go to the margins not to make a difference in the lives of those on the margins, but you hope against hope that those on the margins will make you different, because they're trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to kinship." And I think that's important. All of us kind of begin with service. Even our kids in schools, there's always kind of a service component, which is good. It's a good place to start. It's not where you want to end. Service is the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. Here we are in the ballroom. Get to the ballroom. Don't stay in the hallway. Service is a means to that end. It's supposed to get you to kinship. Because there's distance in service. You know, service provider, service recipient. We want to bridge that distance. At Homeboy Industries, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth be told, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. It's one of those things that joins us together as members of the human family. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend. And he was, among many things, the best listener I've ever met in my whole life. If you were talking to Cesar, nobody else existed, singularly focused, laser beam right on you. He was never looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important was on the approach. But quite famously, once a reporter had commented to him and said, "Wow, these farm workers, they sure love you." And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, "The feeling's mutual," which of course is the goal. How can we arrive at this exquisite mutuality where there is no us and them, there's just us, where everyone belongs and there are no exceptions to that? No one standing outside the circle of compassion, not a single person. No homie found more job opportunities through Homeboy Industries than this guy we all called Dreamer. I knew him since he was a little kid growing up in Pico Gardens housing projects. And he was a super smart kid, though I don't remember that he ever actually went to school. I mean, he was very intelligent, very quick. He had a dangerous sense of humor, which I always loved. He's in his 40s now and doing well, but in his early 20s, he was something of a yo-yo, in and out of being locked up, and he would come to me, and I'd find him a job in the private sector or in one of our social enterprises. But before too long, he'd always gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me. So this was a pattern that repeated itself quite a lot. And so this one time he had finished a 4-month stretch of probation violation in county jail, and there he is sitting in front of me, in front of my desk, and he says what gang members often say, "This time it'll be different." I go, all right. So I pick up the phone with him sitting there, and I call a friend of mine named Gary, who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, California. And Gary had hired homies in the past, so I'm crossing my fingers and hoping against hope that maybe he'll do it again. And sure enough, Gary says, "Yeah, you tell that guy he can start tomorrow." That's a holy man right there. So Dreamer began work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again in front of my desk. I couldn't believe it. I go, "Híjole, Madre Santa, here we are all over again." And this time he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out his very first paycheck and he says, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job." And I said, "Well, gosh, who?" And he looked at me strangely and he said, "Well, God, of course." "Oh, no. That's right. That would be God." Yeah. "You thought I was going to say you." I said, "No, gosh. God's number one." "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, "Yeah, because God would have been had struck down your ass already by now," he says. Well, we howled with laughter. And we fell out of our chairs, and I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider and who's the service recipient. It's mutual. And that's the hope. That is the thing that quenches God's thirst. That is God's dream come true. So Homeboy Industries was born a long time ago, 1988. We'll celebrate 30 years next year, I guess. And it was born during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of LA, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. At the time, it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. And we had 8 gangs at war with each other during that period. And I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and buried my 220th a month ago. Not all from that community, but I know a lot of gang members. I get asked to do this. So the first thing we did was we started a school because there were so many junior high, middle school aged gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them, so they were wreaking havoc in the projects, writing on the walls, selling drugs, violent. So I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them, and I'd say one at a time, I'd say, hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so I kind of forced my hand. So right across the street from the church is our parochial school, our elementary school, K to 8. First 2 floors are entirely the school, but the entire 3rd floor was the convent where the ninjas lived. And so I gathered all the nuns in the living room and I sat them down and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And I'll never forget, they looked at each other and they went, sure, like that. And that was it. And then that brought gang members in large numbers to the church, not to services, but to the property. And that created something of a disconnect. People started to say, wait a minute, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. And so that was a good gospel challenge. And then the gang members said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, mainly only women in the housing projects, myself and the women, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects trying to find felony-friendly employers, and that wasn't so forthcoming. So we invented things. We invented crews, a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center on the property, graffiti removal crew. And then 1992 came, that was 25 years ago. Right after the Rodney King verdict, the whole city exploded. But especially every single pocket of poverty did, except the poorest parish in the city didn't. So the LA Times wanted to know why that was. So they asked me, and I said, well, I don't know. Maybe it's because we have 60 strategically hired rival enemy gang members working side by side. And so they have a reason to get up in the morning, and a reason, more importantly, not to gangbang the night before, and certainly a reason not to torch their own community. So the next day, a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million, asked me how should he, use his money. And now they look back on it, I can see that I really undershot my request. But I said, why don't you buy this abandoned bakery, kitty corner to the church, and it's got ovens, so I don't know, we could put hair nets on rival gang members, and they could bake bread, and we could call it Homeboy Bakery, which was the extent of my business plan. And he said, sure. And so we were off and running, and so a month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. And once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture, and not everything worked. Anything worth doing is worth failing at. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody ever intends to do such a thing. You sort of evolve and you add and you kind of suddenly, before you know it, you're the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. So 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors trying to reimagine their lives and redirect them. Our program is not for those who need help, only for those who want it. So you, like any rehab worth anything, nobody forces you. You walk in the door and we welcome you into a community of tenderness. For tenderness is the highest form of spirituality. It's the thing that creates a connective tissue that joins us together. And since being joined to each other is God's dream come true, tenderness is a handy methodology. And so, 18-month training program is the thing that everybody homie wants because it's a paid gig. And we're kind of reverse cherry pickers. In order to get into that training program, you really have to be belligerent and hard-headed and incorrigible and violent and serious offending person. Because it doesn't make sense to just work with the most likely to succeed. You really kind of want to work with people who are more damaged and traumatized than anybody else. A, that's sort of what God would hope we'd do. And B, it has a singular impact on public safety if you're working with the folks most likely to inflict harm. So they come in and they work and we pay them, and there are different phases and all sorts of training pieces. There's curricular offerings, all the things you'd imagine, anger management and GED, and we still have a school, and free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos than we do. So if any of you are starting to regret that unity tattoo you have, see me afterwards. So we have a designated clinic with 3 laser machines and 45 volunteer doctors, 1 paid physician assistant. I don't know how many thousands of treatments we do a year, but it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And it was all started because if you listen to people, the folks on the margins will tell you what they need. It's the difference really between humility and hubris. Humility says, what would help you? And hubris says, here's what your problem is. And so you want to listen. And so this guy came in named Frank, who was 2 days out of Corcoran State Prison, and I had never met him before. And he's sitting in front of my desk and tattooed on his forehead, filling the entire space like a damn billboard, filling the whole thing. It says, fuck the world. And he looks at me and he says, I am having a hard time finding a job. And I said, well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one. So naturally, I hired him, and he bagged bread for a while, and then I went looking for a doc who had a laser machine, a dermatologist. I found one at White Memorial Hospital, and he donated 1 hour a month to chip away at Frank's forehead and a few others. And pretty soon, I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members who wanted the very same service. So we couldn't really stay with that arrangement, Parentheses, Frank is currently a security guard at a movie studio in Hollywood, and there is no trace left of the angriest, dumbest thing he had ever done. Proving once and for all, as Sister Helen Prejean always says, we're all a whole lot more than the worst things we've ever done. And so we have therapy, we have case managers, and we have all our social enterprises. Homeboy Bakery is thriving. Homeboy Diner, the only place you can get food at City Hall. If you ever fly to LA through Terminal 4, American Airlines, we have a restaurant there. Farmers markets, we have a thing called Homeboy Grocery where we sell chips, salsas, and now guacamole at all the Ralph's supermarkets, which is a Kroger thing from San Luis Obispo to San Diego. Homeboy Silkscreen, which has been around for like 22 years. Homeboy Homegirl Merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff online in our little store. Homeboy Recycling, which is a new thing. We e-waste. I'm not even sure what any of that is, but we'll take your computers and electronics and waste them, I guess. Apparently, I don't know. I'm not a very good pitch man on that. I've just noticed. So I should refine that a little bit more. So what else do we have? Homeboy solar panel installation training program, very successful program. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. And it's kind of a famous place, kind of a who's who. You're always going to bump into people. I just had lunch, this is going to be so name-droppy, with Jim Carrey the other day. He's a good guy, very spiritual guy, actually. And he's been there about 2 or 3 times, but it's pandemonium. It's selfies are all over the place. Once, with only 2 hours' notice, Vice President Joe Biden wanted to have lunch there. So motorcade and entourage and Secret Service and selfies with Uncle Joe. And I was making my annual 8-day silent retreat, so I didn't know anything about it. And so I came home, and Louis Mora, one of the trainees, said, "Hey, while you were gone, we were visited by an MVP." Do you mean a VIP? That one, VIP, yeah. Damn, gee, imagine here at Homeboy Industries, we were visited by the Vice President of the United States, Mick Romney. I think you should file that one under all white guys look alike. And I believe we've added a current affairs class as a result of that. But most famously of all, Diane Keaton showed up for lunch, she of Oscar fame and movie star, Godfather movies, Annie Hall. And she's there with a regular guy who's there once a week, and her waitress is Glenda. Now, Glenda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, gang member, felon. She has no clue who Diane Keaton is, and so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, "Well, what do you recommend?" And Glenda rattles off the 3 platillos, the dishes she particularly likes. And then Diane Keaton says, "Well, I'll have that second one. That one sounds really good." And it's at that moment something dawns on Glenda. She looks at Diane Keaton. She goes, "Wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. You know, like maybe we've met." And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. "Oh, gosh, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before." And Glenda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together." Yeah, that just took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings, now that I think of it. But suddenly, kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind. And what is on God's mind? Well, Jesus will tell you. That you may be one. That's it. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but he doesn't want it to be about him. He wants it to be about us. Same with God, that exhausted God who just wants it to be about us. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, called enlightened witnesses. People who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. This is part of your own mission. At Homeboy, we're kind of allergic to the notion of holding the bar up and asking people to measure up. We don't do that because our exhausted God wants to know, what's all the measuring about? So instead, we hold the mirror up and tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth, and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it's all the same truth, and here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. Then you watch folks, particularly on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But all of us have to reach in occasionally with people and help dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. If you read the Acts of the Apostles, they'll tell you something very essential about healthy communities. Acts will tell you, see how they love one another. Or there's nobody needy in this community. My favorite one of calibrating the health of a community comes in an odd package when it says simply, and awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health as a community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. So I get invited to give a lot of talks, and a number of years ago I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. I said yes. I knew it was a all-day gang in-service for these 600 social workers, so I figured I'm, the keynote or something at the beginning or at lunchtime, or maybe I'm going to end the thing. So I was all ready to go. I was a week away from flying, and I pull out the letter of invitation, and to my horror, I discover that I am, in fact, to be the only speaker the whole damn day from 9 to 5. And so I'm kind of in a panic. So I invite 2 homies, trainees, Andre and Jose, into my office, and I said, look, at the end of the week, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time. Because we got a long-ass day to fill. Well, I'd never heard their stories, and Jose gets up. He's probably 25 at that point, and a trainee finishing up his 18 months with us. Gang member, tattooed, been to prison. But he was finishing up his time in one of the phases, as we call it, and he landed as a very valuable member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery. And now he was helping younger homies with their addiction issues. He had spent a long stretch of time as a homeless man, and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of these social workers and he says, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers did what you just did. They audibly gasped. And then he says, it sounds way worser in Spanish. I've never seen anything like it. We got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. It was, I guess I was 9, he said, when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California. She walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door. The man comes to the door and she says, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days. until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother came and rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through. And second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? Then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion. And he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. It's mutual. And truth be told, if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. In fact, this could well be what ails us at the moment as a country. Not so much division as despising of our own woundedness. It would seem important as a stance of resistance to just simply take seriously what Jesus took seriously. He only took 4 things seriously. They're big things. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional, compassionate, loving kindness, that's one thing. And acceptance. I'm not sure we can go wrong in terms of our own fidelity to God's dream come true if we just take seriously what Jesus took seriously. So let me end with this. It occurs to people sometimes to, especially universities, to force their students to read my book against their will. I'm not complaining. But my alma mater, Gonzaga University in Spokane, forced their incoming freshman class to read it. So come September, October, I can't remember, they said, can you come up and speak? And I said, sure. And they said, can you bring 2 homies with you? And if people are going to pay for it, I do it. And I always pick homies the same way, you know, to come and fly on a trip and help give a talk. I always pick enemies, rivals, just so that they have to share a hotel room just to mess with them. And I always pick homies who have never flown before, just for the thrill of seeing gang members panicked in the sky. And not long ago, I went to Washington, D.C. with 2 older guys, and we were at LAX, and the guy dead serious, says, hey, are we flying Virgin because it's our first time? I said, what? Yes, that's a requirement, apparently. So I picked two homies, Bobby, African-American gang member who worked in our bakery at the time, and Mario. And Mario at the time worked in our merchandise store. I've done this maybe, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times with men and women. I've never taken anybody more terrified of flying than this guy, Mario. I mean, unbelievable. He was just petrified. He was hyperventilating, you know. And we hadn't even gotten on the plane yet. So we were flying out of Burbank Airport, which is kind of a small airport, big bay windows, Southwest Airlines mainly, and they don't have that hermetically sealed chute to get on to walk onto the plane. You have to walk onto the tarmac like you're the president, and they have those steps, the stairs. So the stairs to the front of the plane, they're big planes. Stairs to the front of the plane, and the big feature at Burbank are the stairs at the back of the plane. And so he and I are sitting there, and Bobby's walking somewhere in the airport, and it's early morning, and so our plane arrives, and people are deplaning, and I said, "That's our plane." And I thought, oh my God, he may die before we actually climb those stairs. So then I see two flight attendants, our crew, females, both of them holding very large cups of Starbucks coffee, and they're schlepping up the steps. And Mario goes, "When are we gonna board the plane?" I go, "As soon as they sober up the pilots." There they go now. Perhaps I shouldn't have said this. So I should tell you that Mario, in our 30-year history, is the most tattooed individual who has ever worked there, which is, trust me, saying a lot. So he's all sleeved out, covered, arms covered in tattoos, neck blackened with the name of his gang, head shaved, covered in tattoos, forehead, cheeks, chin, eyelids. Yeah, I won't tell you what the eyelids say, but, and covered. And so I'd never been in public with him. And so we're walking through Burbank Airport, and people are like this, you know, and mothers are clutching their kids a little more closely. And I'm thinking, wow, isn't that interesting? Because if you were to go tomorrow to Homeboy and say, who is the kindest, most gentle soul who works here, they won't say me. They'll say, "Oh, Mario. Yeah, Mario. He now works behind the counter selling baked goods. Kindest, most gentle soul." He's proof that only the soul that ventilates the world with tenderness has any chance of changing that world. So we get to Gonzaga, and this happens only all the time. They tell you about the big talk Tuesday night or whatever it is, 1,000 people. What they don't tell you is they've planned 94 other small talks for you. So this class, this lunch, this meeting, this class, this, all day long. And so I tell Mario and Bobby, I said, "Look, I'm not going to speak at any of these. I'm going to sit in the back of the classroom. I want you to get up and tell your stories." And they were nervous, especially Mario, but they did a good job. Stories of terror and torture and violence and abuse of every kind. And honest to God, if their stories had been flames, you'd have to keep your distance. Otherwise, you'd get scorched. I would not have survived a day of their childhoods. So the nighttime comes, and 1,000 people, and I say, "Hey, here's an idea. Why don't you guys get up before me, each do 7 minutes or something. Tell your stories in an abbreviated way so that I can include you in the question and answer afterwards." And well, they were terrified, especially Mario, because there were so many people. But they got up and did a wonderful job. Then I did my, 45 minutes. And then I called them up, and they're standing on either side of me, and yeah, questions. "Yes, ma'am." And a woman stands, and she goes, "Yeah, I got a question. It's for Mario." First question out the gates for Mario. So he's this tall, skinny drink of water, and he's clutching the microphone. Yes. And he's just terrified, you know, and she says, well, you say you're a father, and you have a son and a daughter, and they're about to enter their teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them? And Mario starts trembling, and I can feel the heat of his emotion, and he's just trembling, and he's closing his eyes, and he's getting a damn hernia trying to come up with this, what the hell he's going to say, and when suddenly he blurts out, and as he says those two words, he retreats back to his closed-eyed, microphone-gripping retreat. And I can feel now he's really actually losing this battle with his emotions. But still, he wants to get this sentence out. I just don't want my kids to turn out to be like me. And there's silence until the woman who asked the question stands, and now it's her turn to cry. And she says, why wouldn't you want your kids to turn out to be like you? You are loving, you are kind, you are gentle, you are wise. I hope your kids turn out to be like you. And 1,000 total perfect strangers stand, and they won't stop clapping. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hands, so overwhelmed that a room full of strangers had returned him to himself. And they, in turn, returned to themselves, because it's mutual. That you may be one. It is the only thing our exhausted God has any interest in, for that is the only praise that he wants. And so you go to the margins, and you imagine a circle of compassion, and then you imagine nobody standing outside of it. And you don't go to the margins to rescue anybody, but if we all go out there, go figure, we all find rescue. And pretty soon you cease to care whether anyone accuses you of wasting your time. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. You go to the margins, so the folks at the margins will make you different, and so that their voices get heard. Thank you very much.
Father Gregory Boyle. In all sincerity, I've got to thank you for what you have said tonight and what you do. It inspires all of us and gives us hope for what's possible within us to connect with another. And so thank you very much, truly.